I am ecstatic about eating these puppies. There's an out route. Oh, it's picked!
Are you kidding me? It's a scrum in the middle of the field. And there's Gibson just pulling his way through that entire War Eagles defense.
On his senior night, Chaplin escapes. What a start with a touchdown. Leaning tower of pretzels.
Welcome into Piedmont Pow Wow as we gear up for the final month of this regular season, and it's been flying by faster than we can count. With Mark Covert, I'm Evan Budrovich. Most importantly, Mark, we have football, but it's the final week of the state fair here in Winston-Salem. So if you get out to the fairgrounds, you have to try not only these crazy pickles that we had, but Mark, I've heard you went to the fair earlier this week, so you got to give me the inside scoop.
I sure did. Tons of great food, obviously. Fair food is always unmatched. Great events, great games, attractions, just everything there. Very fair-wise, let's say. Very.
It was
fair.
more than fair.
Yeah, it was more than fair. But very, very, very good indicator that the fall season is fully here and it's in swing. Just everything great all around. And again, how can you beat deep fried Oreos and pickle pizza? Just things you would never have on an ordinary day. Fair food, again, unmatched, and the Carolina Classic Fair does it better than most.
I'm glad you and the missus had a great time because the fair anywhere you go is great. But Mark, how about the slop bucket, which we're going to try this week on the telecast?
Gosh, I hope. It was almost disheartening because I didn't want to get it when we were there earlier this week, knowing that we were potentially going to be able to have it this Friday, and B, knowing that there was so much other food at the fair that I still wanted to try. I didn't know that I could put the slop bucket into the rotation. So crossing our fingers, hoping it gets to us this Friday.
Let's touch on this week's game. It's our My 48 game of the week. We see Mount Tabor again out of the CPC, and they face a team in Davie County that has had the highest of highs and the lowest of lows. And Mark, we've seen a lot of these games where one team is the prohibitive favorite, but you talk around this Davie County offense and Ethan Driver, the all-CPC receiver. You don't want to say he is the only threat, but he is the biggest threat and a dangerous one for Davie County.
Oh, absolutely. 100%. And if there's one guy that if you are Mount Tabor, you have to make sure you know where he is on the field, that's Driver. I mean, he's going to be the driving force, no pun intended, or maybe it was, on what they do offensively on Friday night. Davie County is really kind of hit or miss with the way that they operate offensively. It's either Driver's going and that whole offense is rolling through. Drayton Nance is getting the football out to him as their quarterback. So if he can get the football out to Driver, get it in his hands, he'd spread it around a little bit, find these receivers, he's got a chance. But I promise you Mount Tabor is not going to make that easy for him.
What a neat matchup, too. Snook Peterkin, who's playing at Virginia Tech, he could play both offense, defense. And then Jadon Blair, who's a safety at Notre Dame, might play some corner. And then you have Ethan Driver, who's sixth in the state in receiving. Like, we had a power matchup of teams last week. Now we have a dynamic cornerback versus receiver battle.
Yeah, we do. And we got to see a little bit last week about what Snook and Blair bring to the matchups as far as how you have to game plan. Oftentimes, East Forsyth was following those two guys across the field last week. So expect more of the same this week with Davie County. They're going to have to be strong up front, though. Mount Tabor, fantastic, again, running the football last week. Even in a losing effort, they were the dominant team on the ground. Expect more of that this week, getting back to that traditional power running style that Mount Tabor loves to pull off, controlling the line of scrimmage, controlling the clock, and controlling the game as it goes along.
Mark, I love you bring up the running game. This reminded me of John Krasinski and Leathernecks. 37 rushes, 280 yards for Mount Tabor. And they threw the ball 4 times. Like, it was not the balance was run. And they have a two-headed monster with Shell and obviously Thompson. And their third running back, Hunter, is hopefully to come back this week. So you add in all three. And I tell you, that running game in the second half, that was fun to watch.
It sure was. But that doesn't mean that Lane Albright, their quarterback, also isn't part of the equation. Those 4 passes doesn't mean that Mount Tabor only dropped back to pass 4 times. It means there was a little bit of duress probably from the pass rush that the Eagles of East Forsyth do pose. But Lane Albright was smart. This is a guy that's going to an option offense at the next level at Davidson. So he knows how to run the football and how to be efficient with it. He did a great job of picking and choosing his spots on Friday. But then again, Thompson and Shell were electric. Hunter comes back in, and he's going to make a huge impact. This is going to be a fun little offense to watch here on Friday night and see where they go, especially after a loss that for a lot of teams might be a little more gut-wrenching. But when we were talking to their head coach, Tyshawn Brown, this week, he seems to have the guys remotivated, get them locked back in. And that's a pretty tall task when you kind of come out of those matchups that are, again, a gut punch to you and to a lot of teams. You got to find a way to press forward. And Mount Tabor's got a chance to put up a big step forward here this week against Davie.
And the fun part for you fans at home, we asked Tyshawn, okay, hey, how was the morale? How do you pick up the mood at practice? He said a little R&B music and a little bit of dancing pregame, right? So, like, for them, it's built by culture. You know, for us, I don't know about you, Mark. For me, it's like heavy metal and rock metal all week. That's how I get myself kind of back into the mood. But hey, if it takes R&B, if it takes some fun jazz, he said, mixed in as well, like whatever it takes to get the guys back in.
I thought you were more of an EDM kind of guy.
A little bit of both. I see what you're doing there.
Yeah, see, hey, whatever gets you back in the mood, and that's totally fine. And I think that's the Mark, you said culture. I think that's a fantastic word, Evan. Like, this is a program now with Coach Brown at the helm that has built a tradition there where they are not just expected to win, but they do. So now you have to find a way again to push forward after a second loss to East Forsyth in as many seasons that came down to the wire. And how do you push forward? Well, you've got a quality opponent this week, one that is on the cusp of the playoff rankings as of right now. I think they're sitting at 30 in Davie. Now you got to push forward and you have another quality opponent in front of you and another chance to get back on the right track. It's going to, again, be a tall task this Friday for Mount Tabor to go on the road at Davie, a pretty raucous environment as well. It's going to be a fun one. We haven't been to Davie in a couple years, so this will be a good matchup to watch and see exactly where the War Eagles are in this process as well.
I'm glad you mentioned playoffs because the Central Piedmont Conference, and we touched on this in the broadcast, right now the number 2 ranked conference in the state in terms of RPI and then the ranked number of teams. And it's unique, right? Because there's the top 3. There's a tier of the Tabors and the West and the East. And then who's in that second tier? Right now, Reagan minus Jacob Smith has proven they are at that tier, and they just beat Davie last week. But now if you're Davie, you get one win over Tabor or West, you are probably a guaranteed play. At least you're in the discussion. And right now you're kind of on that borderline playoff team.
Yeah, and these are must-win games, though, for Davie County. I mean, don't get it twisted. You know, the way that the seeding works within North Carolina high school athletics is a little bit different. I mean, you see year in and year out, there are teams that will make the playoffs and they've got a losing record. I mean, there have been teams that have made the playoffs and they've been, 2-8 or 2-9, but because they have a strong strength of schedule, they've got a great RPI ranking that boosts them up the rankings within the state, and then they're able to capitalize on that. Davie has to win one of the next couple of games to make sure that within the eyes of the voters and where they're at statistically, they have a chance to make the postseason. Now, they're still going to be towards the bottom half of those rankings. I don't think there's really any question about that. 2 and 4, you've struggled to score at times, but even more so, you've struggled to keep opponents out of the end zone. This is make or break time for Davie County. If they want to make a postseason run, it starts this week, and they've got to either put on a good showing or pull off a pretty big upset at home.
Davie County, it's fascinating. So they've played Mooresville, who's a top 25 team, and lost. They've played a good North Davidson team, got a win there. And then in the league, they've looked really good against Reynolds. Nance threw 3 touchdowns. Mark, he threw for 300 yards against R.J. Reynolds, so that's no slouch opponent. And then the next week gets shut out by East. So, and even talking to Tim Devericks this week, it is a lot of up and down. It's like you're at Carowinds. That's how he described it. And that roller coaster is tough to handle sometimes.
Yeah, when you're trying to find consistency, it's one thing. When you're trying to find consistency going into week 8 of your season, that's an entirely different ballgame. No pun intended there. Seriously, this time. This is a situation where they've got to find that consistency this week, and they've got to find it really from the jump, because against a team, Mount Tabor, that wants to control the clock, they want to play a physical brand of football. They're going to be strong up front on both sides of the ball. You've got to come out and punch them in the mouth real quick. And you've got to continue to do that, land those haymakers, so that by the time you're going in the fourth quarter, if you're not right there with them and ahead, then you've got a chance to come out of this game with a win. But that inconsistency has been their biggest problem, their biggest weakness going into this week. And it showed. I mean, again, when you're almost getting doubled up in points right now, I think they're 118 to, as far as points scored, to 211. I mean, that's not where you want to be. And when you talk about the great teams in the state and the teams that are going to be in those playoff matchups, they're going to score the football. So it's not just offensively is finding consistency there, but defensively getting off the field and getting an offense that when it has time to run, it's been explosive. We've seen that. So as long as the defense can handle its stuff, and the offense doesn't get in its own way with penalties, turnovers, and things of that nature, Davy's got a puncher's chance in this.
Some defensive standout, because I'm glad you mentioned defense too. I think both these teams are better than we may project.
Yeah.
First and foremost, if you're Elijah Chafin, the sophomore linebacker for Davy, Mark, he led the state in tackles as a freshman. No freshman had more tackles than this kid, and there's been Caleb Davids, there's been a ton of linebackers in the state who have played. And for Mount Tabor, it's interesting. Matthias Banks was so good last week, and he's a game time decision. And figuring out, here comes Ricky Taylor in a D-line, and they're a little undersized now. And does that open up the running game a bit if you're Davie County?
It might. And it really might actually add to what they're trying to do as far as finding that consistency offensively. We know they can throw the ball. That's not anything. Nance has shown it. Driver's shown it. This receiving corps has shown it. But can they run the football and move it when they need to get those tough yards? Matthias Banks not being there is a blow. But this is still a defensive line and as a whole, a defensive front when you include those linebackers as well. For Mount Tabor, a lot of speed, a lot of pop. So they've got to be able to find those lanes and run with aggression if you're that running back core of Davie County. Again, to find that consistency and to find that balance on offense.
You played offensive line in college. Were you not smiling when you saw Kamari Shell, the linebacker, just fly through the gap and pop some people too in the running game?
Yeah, I mean, it's thrilling. When you got backs back there that are running behind their pads and they're recognizing the work that you're doing and putting in just as much effort at the point of attack as you are, it brings a tear to my eye every single time. Even when we're still sitting up in the booth, it makes me smile knowing that there are running backs out there in a game that has really taken over from a finesse standpoint. I don't say that in a bad way, of course. That's just how the game evolves, right? It's ebbs and flows, right? So eventually at some point, someday down the line, we're going to see offenses that harken back to what Jim Brown used to do. And it's just run.
And it's called Mount Airy football, who have now won 36 straight games. Sorry, that's my Mount Airy plug for the night.
There it is. But this is where they want to be. Again, controlling the football, not turning it over, not making mistakes, and dominating up front. That's the big word, dominating, if you're Mount Tabor. And when you have backs like Thompson, like Shell, who are running behind their pads, and they're throwing that pop down, it gets your offensive line excited. It gets them fired up. And even though as the game goes on, there's some more wear and tear from them, you're able to bring them back into the game, give them that energy and that boost that they need.
I do want to shift a minute to the playoff picture because, of course, news this week coming out in the state due to Hurricane Helene and some of the effects, especially to our friends west of the Charlotte area and especially up in the Asheville area. They moved the regular season back 1 week. It works out in the schedule right before Christmas that way. And now you look at it, Mark, it's a 4-week sprint for some teams, but basically a 3-week sprint.
Yeah.
There's a bye week mixed in. As a player, and I think we can speak to this, bye weeks can be tricky. But now if you are a top seed, you really load up these next month and gear up for that playoff run coming up in mid-November.
Yeah, and it's a different obstacle for all these teams, obviously, going forward. Now, there are going to be teams that, celebrate that bye week and they're able to just kind of relax and get right, like right before the playoffs. And it's not like they have a bye, no one else does. It's them and a lot of other teams throughout the state. But then there's the other side of it, where you're going to have a couple of teams, again, from the western side that are going to be cramming in some games there at the end, where they've got to have a 3-day minimum time span between them in order to be played. So you've got the teams that are going to be super well rested, and then you're going to have the teams that are going to come in there coming off those two games in a week and trying to turn around and find a way to get ready for playoff football. So it creates a very different dynamic. But you're right, Evan. Like, for the teams that are going to be on a bye week, it's hard to stay prepared, because I'm sure you heard this whenever you played as well. There's nothing that gets you in football shape like football. And you can practice all you want, you can go through scrimmages all you want, you can simulate a live game all you want. It's not the same as actually going out there, seeing another color, and then going after it. That's the biggest difference. So handling that bye week is going to be so key in how to maneuver it. That 1 week, the second week of November, is going to be key for seeding, obviously, for the playoffs, and how teams handle those bye weeks that they have. It creates a different dynamic, but it's certainly going to be interesting to watch and see exactly how all that stuff plays out.
And right now, we're a month out, of course, but high school OT with their latest projections. And I'm curious your thoughts on these because RPI goes into it, obviously who you've played, your record, but here are the top four right now. Grimsley at number one. We know what Mitchell Summers can do, and that offense is getting better as the year goes on. I don't think there's a loss in their schedule until November, at least in the regular season.
I agree.
Then you look at number two, and here comes East Forsyth, a top 10 win. Now they're number two. And Mark, there are penalty issues, but that team, if there's any threat, Weddington in that conversation, but East is showing they can compete with anybody.
Yeah, and it's gonna be an uphill battle for East though. Even at that number two spot where you've got a great roster. I mean, you certainly can't talk about it. We saw Bryce Baker put on an absolute show last week. Everyone across the board, Corey Blair at the running back spot. I mean, they were really, really good last week, but it's the penalties. And I think we see that I say year after year because it sounds bad, but it almost feels that way. It's the same conversation that we have with where is East Forsyth going to be because they can't get out of their own way at times. And when you go against a Grimsley, who is fundamentally sound, when you go against a Weddington, who is not just fundamentally sound, but they don't have to worry about guys going both ways either because they have larger rosters. Those are the mistakes that you can't afford to make in those settings. So even at the number two spot right now, and it is great for East Forsyth, there is still a lot of work to do. And if they can't clean those penalties up, it's going to put them in major jeopardy once they start facing a Grimsley, a Weddington, any of those teams that are going to be in that upper echelon of the 4A rankings in the state.
The one last note, especially here in the Piedmont area, RJ Reynolds, one of the last teams out. And what they've been able to do this year, they have a nice win in the league already. They still get to play East and West, so you can add another win there. It's crazy. I mean, right now, I guess technically 5 in with Glenn. Like, this could be a 5-team league this year.
And you don't know because, again, Glenn coming in with a first-year head coach, where are they going to be at? Obviously, we didn't get a chance to see them because our game got postponed due to Hurricane Helene. And then Davie County, as we're going to see. So you've got a lot of movement, especially toward the top, you'll have some movement. But once you get around that first 4 in, last 4 out, that's where there's always going to be some shakeup. So the RPIs are going to come into play, strength of schedule, who you're beating, how you're beating them. It's all going to come into play here in the last 4 weeks. And like you said, it's a mad dash to the finish right now. And that line is in sight for a lot of these teams. It is go time. It is now or never. Any sort of cliche you want to throw in there, they have to make it happen now. And Davey's right there. Reynolds is right there. Glenn is right there. I mean, there's a ton of teams circling that little line at between 32 and 33. It's going to be interesting to see how it all plays out.
Also, one last note, you mentioned teams in the local area. There's some sneaky good games this week, including West and Reagan.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the tier of, so West now has to win out because they lost to Tabor, and the league title is well within that program's chances as well.
Yeah. I mean, they have to definitely have some stuff break their way, of course. And we know that final week of the regular season, as always, it's East and West. And last year, it was for a conference title. East Forsyth able to pull it out at the end. What's going to happen this year? If we get to that point in time, it's going to be a very interesting game because you're going to start seeing exactly what maybe we saw last year, where West starts to pick up a little bit of momentum and they've got some confidence riding in their favor. Again, East Forsyth, where are they going to be at? Can they clean up the penalties? It's an exciting finish to this season. And of course, the CPC always delivers. We see it every single year. So again, as we've said so many times before, excited to watch and excited to see how it all unfolds. And could you ask for anything better? There's a fair in town. There's fall weather finally here.
Oh.
Football is finally rounding into shape where the great teams are starting to take form and separate themselves from the pack.
Fair food, you have me sold, my friend. Anything else we talk about, not as important as the fair.
Hoodie weather, man. It's hoodie weather.
Yeah, we might have to wear suits next week. One last game in the 3A. We're going to head a little more towards Elon here. So the 3A Central Conference. How about our boys at Williams High School, the Bulldogs, 6-0, their best start in over a decade, and they take on Western Alamance. We've seen Eastern Alamance a lot over the years. Western's 5-1. Those teams are both ranked in the top 10 of the Triad area, and we don't talk a ton about teams that are a little more east of us, but certainly neat that even at the 3A level that it's wide open in that conference.
Hey, like you said, we've had Eastern Alamance on, I believe, the last 3 years now as they've played Reedsville. So we know about Alamance County, and Western Alamance is a team that is more of a traditional power within that area, led by Hal Caps for years in the early 2000s, rounding into the 2010s. So a program there that knows how to win, knows how to get it done, and they're coming back into shape that way. Nice matchup right out there. Going to be very important for the rankings. Of course, going forward, we talked last week about how Mount Tabor and East Forsyth, our game of the week with My 48, was a preview and potentially a claim staker to the rest of the state. Like, hey, this team that wins this game tonight is here to play, and they are one of the best in the state. Same thing for Western Alamance and Williams. It's going to be a good matchup there. We're going to keep an eye on it as well from the booth.
Thank you guys for joining us this week. Mark, you've been excellent as always. One last note on Williams, their quarterback, Dan Mahan, 7th in the state in passing. So that dude can sling it. And then Western, obviously, they're top 10 in the state in running. So every game we pick is always good. Davie County, elite wide receiver and Ethan Driver. We told you about Mount Tabor, and I think Snook Peterkin's going to do some Snook things again. And please watch 7:30. We'll have the Facebook stream up and running, YouTube, and Mark and I will be all dressed up in our polos for food. So we're ready to go.
I am ecstatic about eating these puppies. There's an out route. Oh, it's picked!
Are you kidding me? It's a scrub in the middle of the field. And there's Gibson just pulling his way through that entire War Eagles defense.
On his senior night, Chaplin escapes. What a start with a touchdown.
Leaning tower of pretzels.
Oh!